So graphing on this grid below, if we go to our graph, let's go into our view window, and I'm going to go from negative 2 pi, and I just type negative 2 pi. Now, as soon as I hit enter, Christina, my calculator will decimalize it. That's okay. Positive 2 pi. Scale. If you look from here to here, how far is that from here to here? From 0 to, what's it say on the x-axis right there? Pi. And how many squares is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? So if 6 squares make up pi, you know what each square is worth? Pi by 6, 1/6 of pi. So my scale, I'm going to go pi divided by 6, because 6 squares make up pi. That must mean each hash mark is one of those. Apparently 0.525, 0.5235, no, whatever, it's pi by 6. Dot, I don't change. Now, for now, even though on my graph paper I go from like negative 10 to positive 10, I'm going to say, trust me, go from negative 3 to positive 3. We're going to come back and we're going to change that and scale 1. So set your view window up that way, please. And then graph sine x and hit draw. You see the shape in front of you? Yes? Okay. I'm going to show you a way that you can memorize this graph fairly easily. You notice I haven't hit graph yet because I know what this looks like. Here's what I know. I know that the sine graph, y equals sine x, and I'll do that one in red. I know it starts right there. Goes through 0, 0. Does your graph go through 0, 0? Yes. Okay. And I know that its period is 2 pi. It repeats itself every 360 degrees. In other words, I know it goes through 0, 0 right there as well. So far, so good. I also know that its shape is like this. Don't write this down. I know that its shape looks like this, like a little S. Which means, if you look up for a second, I know that halfway between here and here, it also goes through 0. That was pretty easy to eyeball. Well, in fact, halfway is at pi. What's its amplitude? 1. It goes 1 up and 1 down. Yes? And I know where those occur. The 1 up occurs halfway between these two guys, right at pi by 2. It's going to go right there. And the 1 down occurs halfway between the next two guys, right there. Here is a graph of sine x. And then I can continue the pattern. You'll notice, Sean, if I start here and move to the left, it goes middle, bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. It's going to go like this. It's going to be at the bottom right there, the middle right there, the top right there, the middle right there. I'm pretty sure this is what your graphing calculator gave you, yes? What's the amplitude of this graph? How high does it go? 1 high. How low does it go? Negative 1 high. So what's its amplitude? 1. The second graph that I want you to graph, and I'll do it in blue, is 2 sine x. So if you go to your graphing calculator, press exit to get back to the graph menu, and where it says y2, let's graph 2 sine x. And then hit draw. What's the difference here between these two graphs? What does that 2 do? I'm going to argue, Foster, same shape, S-shaped, except how high? What's the amplitude? Count. You got your graph? What's the amplitude? 2. Why would the amplitude be 2? Was there a 2 somewhere in the original equation? So that graph is going to go through here at 0, through here at 0, through here at 0, through here at 0, through here at 0. But instead of 1 high, it's going to be 2 high. Instead of 1 down, it's going to be 2 down. It's going to look like that. The amplitude changes. It's going to look like that. You see it, Brooke? By the way, what number is sitting right here in front of the sine? It's invisible. 1. What was the amplitude? 1. What number is sitting right here in front of the sine? Obviously. 2. What was the amplitude? 2. Spotting a pattern? I wonder if that continues. Graph, I wrote y equals 4 sine x. You know what? I don't think I need a graphing calculator. What number is sitting in front of the sine? What will the amplitude be, do you think? So I'm going to do this one in black. I think it's still going to go through there, 0 there, and 0 there. But halfway, instead of being 1 high, it's going to be 4 high. And halfway, instead of being 1 down, it's going to be 4 down. It's going to look like that. Oh, and like that. Same thing works for cosine. The only difference is cosine doesn't start at 0, 0. Cosine starts up high, and so it's going to look a little different, but the same idea. The number in front of sine and cosine tells you the amplitude. It's a vertical stretch. So what does the parameter a do to the graph of y equals a sine x? What does the number sitting right there do? And you know what? We traditionally use the letter a there, and conveniently a also starts, yeah. So a changes the amplitude. In fact, a tells you, you know what? Instead of changes the amplitude, I can even say a tells us the amplitude, because in the original there was an invisible 1 there. Next page. On the grid below, graph cosine. You know what? We're not going to use our graphing calculators. We're going to try and do this in our heads. You ready? Cosine looks like, you can do a little sketch maybe right up here. Cosine looks like this. It sort of looks like a letter C if you turn your head sideways, kind of. Just like sine sort of looks like a letter S, kind of. It's the best I got. Okay? Where cosine normally starts at 1 high and goes to -1 high. So if I do cosine of x, and I'm going to do it in red, it's going to start right here. And once I go 2 pi, 1 period, Connor, it's going to be the same height as it started from right there. Don't write this down. Now remember, cosine looks like this. That's a terrible sketch, but what I want you to realize is that halfway between 0 and 2 pi, that's when it's going to be at the bottom, right there. And do you know where it's going to be between, you know where it's going to be halfway between top and bottom? Have you spotted the pattern that I've been repeating? I've been saying top, something, bottom, something. Top, what? Middle. It's going to be in the middle there. It's going to be in the middle there. Here. It's the cosine graph. And it continues. If I go backwards faster, I'm at the top. Now I'll be at the middle. At the bottom. In the middle. top. Is that okay, Rach? Okay. By the way, Rachel, also notice that the key points, top, middle, top, middle, bottom, middle, the key points also for sine, top, middle, bottom, middle, they occur, if we're talking about our circle, Caitlin, at 0, at 90 degrees, pi by 2, at 180 degrees, pi, at 270 degrees, 3 pi by 2. Take a look at the x values, right? Pi by 2. So really all I'm doing is I'm saying if I go around the circle every quarter, that's when I'm going to be at the top or the bottom or the middle or the bottom or the top or the bottom or the middle or the bottom. There's a cosine graph. What do you think, what do you think that does? What does a negative do? What did a negative do to the parabola? Flipped it. You know what a negative does to the cosine or the sine? Flips it. In other words, I'll do this one in black. It's going to be here. Instead of 1 up, it's 1 down. Middle. Instead of bottom, top. Middle. Instead of top, bottom. Here is a negative cosine graph. For what it's worth, cos x, negative cos x. There they are. Gives you a lovely little zigzaggy pattern. There's negative cos x, starts at the bottom. Positive cos x starts at the top. What's the next graph? Hey, what do you think that 3 does? Instead of starting 1 high like cosine did, it's going to start where? 3 high. It's going to change the amplitude. Connor, it's going to change the amplitude. Rosanna's looking so stunned. I hope it's about math. It's going to change the amplitude. So I'm going to do this one in blue. You can try this on your graphing calculator, but I'm telling you, it's instead of starting 1 high, going to start 1, 2, 3 high. Still going to go through 0 there, but instead of going 1 down, it's going to go 3 down. Still going to go through 0 there, but instead of being 1 high, it's going to be 3 high. It's going to look like that. It's going to look like that. Just to convince you. There you go. Up 3, down 3, up 3, down 3. The amplitude is 3. What do you think D is going to look like? What will that negative do? So instead of starting up 1, it's going to start down 1. What will that 5 do? Instead of starting down 1, it's going to start down 5. So I'm going to do this one in green. It's going to start out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down. Still going to go through 0 there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up. Still going to go through 0 there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down. It's going to go like that. I could continue to the left, but hopefully you spot it. So for the graph of y equals a cos x, what do you think the a does? A tells us the amplitude. Oh, but wait a minute. It also tells us one more thing, which we didn't mention on the previous page. What if A is negative? What does that do? Okay, so let's go back here. A tells us the amplitude, and let's write if A, if. Okay, let's try this again. A is negative, it flips the graph vertically. Flips it. I should make sure flips it vertically, not horizontally. I'll mention vertical. And I can mention that here too. Nope, that didn't work very well. Can also flip the graph vertically. Key idea for the graphs of y equals a sine x and a cos x, we say that a determines the amplitude of the graph. Amplitude. Sine and cosine have an amplitude of a, and if there's no number there, a is an invisible 1. Sine and cosine have an amplitude of 1. They go 1 up, 1 down, 1 up, 1 down. They go a up, a down, a up, a down. So, write the equation, it says, of each graph below. Let's do the black one first. Okay? Now, you guys don't have colors, but I think you have one thin line and one thick line on your graph, yes? Okay? So mine's colored, yours is black and white, but you can still distinguish. Let's do the thin one first. First of all, is it sine or is it cosine? And how do I know? Here's how you know. You ask, is it starting 0 high in the middle or is it starting 1 high? So go find the y-axis. Is graph A sine or cosine? Sine. Positive sine or negative sine? Positive sine goes upwards. Negative sign would be flipped. Negative sign would go downward. So at positive sign, what's the amplitude? So this must be y equals 4 sine x. This would be a great multiple choice or test question, giving you some graphs and saying, hey, tell me the equation. What about graph B? Is this sine or cosine? And how do you know? Again, if you look along the y-axis, cosine starts either up high or if it's negative, down low. Oh, see it, Brooke? Down low. This is a cosine, and not only is this a cosine, I can tell you this is a negative cosine graph. What's the amplitude? Amplitude is always positive. I'm glad Jordan said that. By definition, the amplitude is 3. The negative, it just tells you start at the bottom. But when I ask you what's the amplitude, it's positive. We want... Okay. Example 4 says, graph the following by hand on the grid below. Okay? So the first one is sine. Remember, sine normally looks like this. Normally it starts in the middle and goes up. First of all, positive or negative in this question here? So I'm going to start in the middle, but I'm going to head down. What's my amplitude? What's not negative? What's my amplitude? Christina, you're right. Not negative. What's my amplitude? 5. Amplitude, by definition, folks, amplitude is positive. The amplitude is 5. The negative tells me to head down, but the amplitude is not positive. It's 5, okay? So that means this graph is going to go 5 down, back to middle, 5 up, back to middle, 5 down, back to middle, 5 up, back to middle. Where? Well, here's what I know. I know that one full period will get me back to where I started from. I know the period of sine is 2 pi, once around the circle. I know that I'm going to be back at 0 dead center because somehow I've got to make it fit that strange shape there. Don't write that down. Which means halfway between here, that's when I'm going to be at the bottom. How low will I be? Kayvon, sit up. How low will I be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Going to be right there. And Sean, I'm going to be at the top, halfway between here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to look like this. I can't hear you. Speak up. Pardon me? Sines, so there's two key graphs, cosine and sine. Sine is always going to start in the middle. This is positive sine. Negative sine would go like this. Head downwards. Cosine starts at top if it's positive. Cosine starts in the bottom if it's negative. Those are the four types of graphs for sine and for cosine. So the fact that this was negative, first of all, the fact that it was a sine says I'm going to start in the middle. Negative says I'm going to head down. How far? 5 down. Okay. Brooke, let's do G together. I did A in red. I'll do G in blue. First of all, what's the trig function in G, Brooke? Sine or cosine? Positive or negative? So it's going to start up high. If it was, just don't draw it yet. Just going to say it's going to start up high. Okay? How high? What's the amplitude? So my first dot is going to be right there. And then every quarter circle is when I'm in the middle, bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom. So quarter circle is going to be pi by 2. I'm going to be in the middle. And that's right here on my graph. At pi, I'm going to be at the bottom, 2 down. At 3 pi by 2, I'll be back in the middle. And at 2 pi, I should be back where I started from, because that's once around the circle, that's the period. Oh, that's terrible. Yes, tongue helps. Okay, so this is y equals 2 cos x, and this is y equals negative 5, 4, 5, what did I give you? Negative 5 sine x. Is that okay, Brooke? Yeah? Okay. You got to do a little, you got to memorize the basic shapes. But they're nice shapes. They're not yucky, wonky. Tangent is, but that's why we're avoiding it. Hey, Rachel, what's the third graph they're giving me? Negative, you said? What's the so it's cosine, which means negative is going to start down low. What's the amplitude? What's the number in front of the cos? Oh, so all this one's going to be, and I'll do this one in black. It's going to start at negative 1, and then it's going to go to the middle, and then it's going to go to positive 1, and back to the middle, negative 1. This is, you know what? I just realized I used letters h of x, and you could call the blue one g of x, and you can call the red one f of x. Is that okay, Caitlin? Okay. Oh, and I'm kind of assuming you can continue the pattern going that way. I just didn't bother. I did one full period. Thumbs up, Erica? Good, let's keep going. Now we want to ask ourselves, okay, I know what multiplying something in front does. What does adding something on the end do? Hey, what did this do? Don't write this down. What did that do to the parabola? What did that do to the parabola? Didn't make it wider. This number here gave you your wider and skinnier. What did a plus 5 after the x squared do? Moves it 5 up. Moved it 5 up. Remember that? That was your vertex. Okay? So, let's go into our graphing calculator here. Let's delete any graphs that we have. And let's try graphing sine bracket x close bracket plus 3. And you're going to have to get in the habit now of putting the x in brackets. Otherwise, your calculator won't know whether you want it to go plus 3 and then take the sine, or whether you want to take the sine and then add 3 to the answer. Kayvon, you typed that in, of course, yes? Okay. And hit draw. Oh. What's the problem here? What's the problem here? We're not high enough. So we're going to need to change our view window. Let's go Shift, View Window. Let's make our Y max, I don't know. I'm going to guess. How about 8? Draw. Oh, there it fit. There it fit. Looking at your graph paper, how high is right here? Count. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4? Is that right? Hey, you know what? I can cheat. Max. How high is a max? Looks like a maximum is 4 high. And a minimum is 2 high. What's the highest my graph is, Sean? What did we say?
4.
What's the lowest?
2.
What's halfway between 4 and 2? What's my midline? I heard someone say it. 3? Can you see a 3 anywhere in the original equation? Okay. Let's look at B before we graph these on graph paper. This is going to be sine bracket x take away 2. What does that look like? Oh, moved it down. Care to guess how far it moved it down? Care to guess how far it moved it down? Seb? Care to guess how far it moved it down? 2, you say. Care to guess how far this one got moved up? 3, you say. Wow. So, how do we sketch these? Folks, I've got about 5 different groups right now looking at each other doing chatting. It's got to stop. Okay? I need you focused here, people. Okay? Okay? Yes? 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 Jacob, my friend, what are we adding to this graph? What this does is it moves the graph 3 up, and the easiest way to do that is with your pencil, draw a dotted horizontal line 3 up. That's your midline. Do that. And please stop making me have to tell you to do that after I say already to draw that. Yes? Here's what the sine of 3x is going to look like. Of sine of x plus 3 is going to look like. Brooke, it's the same as before, but it's going to start in the middle. Instead of starting right, don't write this down, instead of starting right here and going 1 up, it's going to start right here. That's my new middle. And if I go 1 period over, it's going to end up right there. That's 1 period, that's 2 pi. You know what? It's going to be in the middle again, right there. What's the amplitude of this graph? 1. It's going to be 1 up, 1 down. It's going to look like that. Looking at B, this has been moved 2 down. And as soon as I see we're adding or subtracting something after the trig function, Brooke, what I do is I draw a horizontal line as high as whatever I'm adding or subtracting. I'm going to draw a horizontal line at -2. That's my new midline. In fact, really, that's my new x-axis. I pretend temporarily that's the x-axis. Sine starts in the middle. But my new middle is this new midline. Sine is 2 pi long. It's going to repeat itself when I get back to 2 pi. Right? It's going to be back dead center here. Right? Right? Yeah. It's going to be 1 up, 1 down. Yeah, that's not great. It's going to look like that. And keep going forever and ever and ever in that pattern. What do we think the parameter d sitting right there does? Changes the midline. In fact, the equation of the midline of a sinusoidal function of sine or cosine has the equation y equals d. That's how high the midline is. That's how high the midline is. It says, graph the following by hand and then check your answer on a graphing calculator. Let's put all this together. You ready? We'll do this by hand, and then we're going to check our answer. We're going to graph one full period, so we're going to graph from 0 to 2 pi. A. Here's how we handle this. First thing, what trig function is A? What trig function is A? Cos. So cosine starts up high or down low. Positive or negative? Positive. It's going to start up high. Don't draw anything yet. What's the midline of A? What's being added or subtracted? So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 up. All of us right now. Let's draw a dotted line right there. Is that okay, Cole? What's the trig function they gave me? Sine or cosine? Positive or negative? So it's going to start up high. What's the amplitude? So from my midline, count up 1, 2. That's a point on my graph right there. How long is the period? 2 pi. What that means, Connor, my friend, is if I go to 2 pi, I'm going to be back to where I started from right there. Remember what the cosine graph looks like? Kind of a sort of a letter C. Halfway through the cosine graph is when I'm at the bottom. Now, where is the bottom going to be? Instead of 3 up, it's going to be 3 down. Amplitude 3. So if I go exactly halfway, which is pi, from my midline, I'm going to be down 1, 2. I'm going to be right there. That's a point on the graph. Let me say that again because I lost about half of you. I know that cosine looks like, that's terrible. I know that cosine sort of looks like that, which means halfway between the 2 peaks, there's going to be a valley. So I know the valley is going to be somewhere there. Where? 3 down. Oh, and then halfway between a valley and a peak, I'm going to be 0 high right there. I'm going to be 0 high right there. But by 0 high, what I really mean is, Brooke, I'm going to be on my midline. I'm going to be on my midline right there, and halfway between pi and 2 pi is 3 pi by 2. I'm going to be on my midline right there. This graph is going to look like that. This is f of x. You gonna make it, Jordan? Because you're not looking good, and you got coffee.
Yeah, just don't feel that great.
Okay. By the way, just to convince you that we're right, I'll graph this. Let me delete this one. Let me delete this one. This is going to be 3 cos bracket x close bracket plus 4. Draw. Oh, let's just go from, I'll change my view window. I'll go from 0 to 2 pi. Draw. Is that what we drew? By the way, what's the range? What's the highest point? What's the maximum point? What's the highest height on this graph? How high is this? Can you see a 7 hidden in the equation anywhere? You really can't see a 7 hidden in the equation somewhere? Jordan, what? What's the lowest this graph gets? Can you see a 1 hidden in the equation somewhere? Here's what I'm saying. Can you see the range hidden in the equation somewhere? Because the range is between 1 and 7. You see it? B, g of x, negative 2 sine x plus 2. How are we going to graph that? What trig function, sine or cosine? So it's going to be an SE shape, negative or positive? Negative, it's going to head down. What's my midline? Plus what? So I'm going to do this one in red. I'm going to draw a dotted line too high. Which trig function, sine or cosine? Sine, I have to memorize, that starts in the middle. By the way, you don't really have to memorize that, because if you forget, you can always just go to your graphing calculator and graph sine x untouched, and you'll see it goes through 0, 0. But it's worth having up here. If you have to look that up, you're in trouble. Oh, that also means, Christina, I'll be back to the middle when I get to 2 pi once around. And in sine, I'm also in the middle halfway. What's my amplitude? 2. Negative or positive is the graph. Okay, so if it, by the way, don't write this down. If that negative wasn't there, my first point would go right there, because that's an amplitude of 2 from my midline. But because it's negative, my first point goes down 2, middle, up 2. That red graph is g of x. By the way, what's the highest it gets? 4. Can you see a 4 hidden in the equation anywhere? This is why for amplitude we ignore the negative, by the way. What's the lowest it gets? 0. Can you see a 0 hidden? Hey, you know what? Before we graph C, what's the highest graph C is going to get? 8. What's the lowest it's going to get? It's tricky. Negative 2. Okay. Let's graph C. I'll do C in black. What's the midline? So I'm going to do a dotted line at 3 high. Which trig function? Sine or cos? Cos? Positive or negative? Start down low. How low? Amplitude is? Not negative. Amplitude, by definition, is positive. What's the amplitude? So from my midline, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. I got to scroll down. From my midline right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a point on my graph right there. And I'll be back to where I started from once I've gone through the period. For cosine, once I've gone halfway, then I'll be at the highest point. What was the highest point? 8. So you're going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or I could have counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I could have counted the amplitude from the midline. Or I can actually just look at the numbers and say, it's going to be 8 high there. I'm going to be halfway between 0 and pi. And I'm going to be halfway high again on the midline between pi and 2 pi. This graph is going to look like that. That's h of x. Is that okay, Connor? We need to practice this, but as long as you keep everything straight, it's the parabola done with sine and cosine. It's almost the same stuff, except for the parabola, you kind of stretch things. Here, the number in front changes the amplitude. But the slide and the flip, that's the same. Is that okay, Jake? Let's keep going. I think it's the last page. Yeah, it is. Good, 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 good. It says, state the domain, the maximum, the minimum, the amplitude, the equation of the midline, and the range of the following. Domain is easy. For sine and cosine, they keep going forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. What's the domain of sine and cosine? All reals. So let's write all reals, all reals, all reals. Let's do maximum, minimum for all three of these in a row really, really quickly. Look at this equation. What's the highest it's going to get? Can you see? Not 3. 5. It's been moved 3 up with the midline. And what's the amplitude on top of that? 2. So if you move 3 up and you go 2 up from there, how high are you, Silka? 5. Can you see the 5 hidden in the equation anywhere? Yep. Face down in the appropriate block, please. What's the lowest it's going to get? What's my midline? And then the 2 down from there. Let's do the next one. What's the highest? What's the midline? Down 2, right? Down 2. But what's the amplitude? So if you go down 2 and then up 3, how high are you? 1, right? If you go down 2 and then down 3, how high are you? I heard it. -5, right? 2 down and then 3 down from there. Let's do the next one. What's the midline? 1 up. What's the amplitude? So if you go up 1 and then 7 up, how high are you? 8. If you go up 1 and then 7 down, a little trickier, how high are you? -6. We're going to skip amplitude. Well, you know what? Let's do amplitude. Sure. 2, 3, 7. Jordan, not negative, just by definition. Because, oh, by the way, the reason is, Jordan, in physics, amplitude is the altitude, and by definition in physics, altitudes are positive. It's a physics thing. What's the equation of the midline? I'm going to tell you y equals 3. What's the equation of g of x's midline? Y equals -2. What's the equation of h of x's midline? Y equals? What's the range? You know what? What's the minimum this graph gets for a height? What's the maximum? So the range is everything between 1 and 5. Now, how do we write that? You may have seen this last year. We say it this way. 1 less than or equal to y less than or equal to 5. That's how you write everything above 1 and touching 1 and below 5 and touching 5. That's the shortest, it's the second shortest way to write in between 1 and 5. There is one shorter way, but it's confusing. What's the range of the next one? What's the lowest it gets? -5. What's the highest it gets? 1. So everything between -5 less than or equal to y less than or equal to 1. Try the range of this third one on your own. Look up when you're done. See if you get the same thing as me. -6 less than or equal to y less than or equal to 8. Okay. Now, great multiple choice question or test question will be to give you an equation, no graph, and say, tell me the range, or tell me the maximum, or tell me the minimum. You can find them by graphing, but it's tedious. These are ones you can do in your head. Just be careful. Example 8 says, write 2 equations of a sine function with an amplitude of 3 and a midline of y equals 1. What's the amplitude? What's the midline? Why did I say write two equations? That's one equation that has an amplitude of 3 and a midline of 1. There is one more. Ah, what? Example 9. Write the equation of a cosine function. You know what? Y equals cos x. I'll leave a space in front. Oh, with an amplitude of 3. What the? And the minimum point of 0, -4. You know what? Let's do a little sketch right here. What's the minimum point they told me, Kayvon? Read me the whole thing. What? The whole thing. What, comma, what?
0, -4.
Say that again, because people were whispering in that back corner there, and they're going to stop before I come over the top rope at them. Yes?
0,
So it goes through 0, comma, negative. You know what? 0, -4 is right around there. How does that tell you what the midline is? First of all, is this graph starting in the middle, up top, or down low? Rachel, must be negative cosine, because a positive cos would have been up there. Yes? What's the amplitude? How low is this point here, though? So what must my midline have been? You're right. What? It must have gone 1 down, and then from there, 3 down. That's the only way you can get to -4. That's tricky, but think about it. Okay? Last one, toughest one. We're done. Write the equation of the sine function with the midline equation of y equals 1. You know what? It's going to look like this then. Y equals something, sine x plus 1, because there's my midline equation, going through pi by 2, -1. What? Let's see. Let's put a little 2 pi right there. Do that. If all that way is 2 pi, what's that right there, halfway? Pi? Hey, what's that right there, halfway between 0 and pi? This is what they've given me as my x. Okay, so here's pi by 2, and they're telling me that at pi by 2, we are at -1 high. We are at pi by 2, comma, -1. Now I got to think, what kind of a graph could do that? Ready? Look up. Could a sine graph go through there? Could a sine graph, let me walk through it. You've seen it, but could a sine graph go through there? No? Could a cosine graph go through there? Remember, cosine looks like this. No? I heard a few of you said you saw it already. I think this is a negative sine graph. I think the only way that I can get through down there is negative sine, head down. So I think it's negative. And if I'm starting right there, well, that's terrible scale, Mr. Dueck. If I'm starting at +1, what's my amplitude? Okay. That's the only way. That's a very tough question. But that's the only way that I can get there. I must have had to, if I'm going through pi by 2, comma, -1, I must have been a negative sine graph. Oh, and if I have a midline of +1, the only way I can go through there is my amplitude must be 2. What's your homework? Try number 1. Check your answer on your graphing calculators. Number 2, check your answer on the graphing calculators. 3 is good. 4 is good. I think I'm going to assign most of this because this is really, really important. Yep, 7. So I did do an answer key. I think I'm right, but I was doing the answers in a hurry. You got about 20 minutes, not quite 13 minutes. You can probably get all this done in class. Also, please hand in anything from lesson 5 or 4 or 3 or 2 if you had questions.
Did you assign 6?
I assigned them all.